Good morning, student. Today we talk about genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is actually a process that you actually engineer the gene to create something that is actually supposed to be better by altering the makeup of the gene, right? Now, for background, you know that each person is different because we have different gene. The only two person that exactly looks alike is actually identical twins, alright? But if you have this genetics engineering advancement, do you think you'll lose your identity one day by manipulating a gene in a way that you actually can create a superhuman? So what is actually genetic engineering? It's actually creating organism with a novel genetic sequence to improve the offspring. And that has been actually done in the animals and plants community. You manipulate the gene of, let's say, a cow so that the offspring of this cow will be bigger size, have more milk, and have more meat for you to feed. Similarly, let's say you may want to engineer the plant in a way that you develop resistance to certain insecticides or develop resistance to certain insects so that the plants can be grow bigger, looks more beautiful. So these are some of the genetic engineering. So the process of genetic engineering is actually quite a complicated one. Basically, it involves the collection technique to find out what genes that's involved in causing which kind of output, whether this particular gene causes the beauty, another gene causes the color, another gene causes the size. So you must identify which is the gene responsible to what factors. Then you must know how to modify the gene so that it actually can produce better offspring. And then of course after you modify, you insert the gene back into the species. Alright. So that's actually a brief summary of how genetic engineering is done. A transgenic combination means that a genetic makeup of the creature is manipulated, and that actually can be through a combination of actually sometimes human or plant combination. So there's a plant animal human combination. Sometimes there's animal animal combination, which means that you take a gene of one particular animal, you modify it, you insert it to the body of another animal. All right. And sometimes even you have animal human combination where you take a gene from the animal and you modify and you put in the human itself. So these are what it calls a transgenic combination. A zero transplantation is actually transplantation of living cells, tissues, and organs from one species to another. So this one you transplant the whole tissue itself. All right. So for example, a good example is a heart transplant. All right. So somebody has a heart problem, a heart failure. He will not likely to live long. But in order to find another donor, you must find another person with healthy heart to donate. But you may not find a person with healthy heart to donate because the person may still want to live, or you can't find accident victims who can donate a healthy heart. So what do? You may want to take a heart from a species that's quite related to human, which is a chimpanzee. You take the chimpanzee's heart and you transplant human. So that can be what they call zero transplantation. But of course the ethical issue is then, is it right to sacrifice a chimpanzee so that this person can live longer? There are advantages of genetic engineering. Right? Main advantage is of course you want to produce a better food products, bigger cows, fatter cows, more milk, cows with more milk, bigger plants and so on. You can also increase efficiency because you actually can plant more plants in a small area of place. Cheaper in that case because you produce more meat, and of course some of these products may be resistant to certain diseases, so you actually improving the offspring. So it sounds very good, right? In theory it sounds very good, but there are also disadvantages. Sometimes when you alter the genes, you don't know whether you have a long-term problem or not. Short-term, you get a bigger cow, but in long-term, do you know that whether if you eat that particular cow meat, you may get certain poison? You would not know. Of course, other issues is like, do you have the right to alter the nature? Because the nature created cow of this size. Should you have the right to make it a bigger cow? See, because if you do it a bigger cow, what if it actually causes the environmental imbalance? Because now bigger cow needs to eat more grass and you don't have enough grass, so you cause a grass problem. And of course, other things, if you can do it in animals, would you want to do it in human? So what if, you create human of, instead of people now 6 feet tall, you create people of 9 feet tall giant, right? Can you do that? So is it ethical to do that to human now? Somewhat example genetic engineering. You will know the Dolly the sheep story. Dolly is cloned, And certainly in Korea, there is also clone the dog called Snuppy. So these are some examples of genetic engineering. Now, what are some of the laws that govern genetic engineering? In US, genetic engineering are regulated by 3 government agencies, which is the FDA, Food Drug Administration, Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, and Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services. So there are regulations in US to make sure that genetic engineering is not done anyhow. Before we do a genetic engineering, we need to consider some considerations like, are we blurring the lines between species by creating transgenic combinations? So you have a dog gene, you have a cat gene, will you create a hybrid, a cat and a dog mixture that can bark and climb trees at the same time? Is it dangerous to do that? Do we know the health risk with this transgenic? So you created a dog and cat hybrid. Do you think that this particular offspring will be prone to certain disease that's more common, right? What are the long-term effects on the environment? Because our environment is very stable and equivalent. If you go and create a new species, will it actually cause harm to the environment? What are the ethical, social, and legal controls to control this research? And of course, are we causing pain to this hybrid? You know, if you get a dog that don't look like a dog and a cat doesn't look like a cat, it's a mixture of cat and dog, this offspring may actually be boycotted by its own species. So you're actually creating a lot of problem. Other issues that you need to consider will this intervention in human create physical or behavioral traits that is different? You may get a superhuman, but is a society acceptable of this superhuman? Alright. And what would be other personal, social, and cultural consequences? You created somebody who is 9 feet tall now. You know, it sounds good because this guy is very strong. But do you think this guy can live properly in the environment? In our environment, he can't sit in a car. The car is not big enough for him to sit. He can't go to stay in a normal hotel room because hotel bed is only up to 6 feet long for normal people. So then you're actually creating problem for this particular unfortunate person. There are also arguments against genetic manipulation. One of it is, of course, is still very risky. Nobody knows what is a long-term side effect. And other issues are like, are we violating the autonomy of the child? You know, you created a child that's going to grow up to be a giant, but is it fair to the child? He didn't get to choose it, you know. And are we playing God in the way that we are manipulating something that is not natural? So that's the issue about playing God, because things like this are not natural. So do we have the right to alter the nature? So if you want to do genetic engineering, what are some of the kind of restrictions that should apply, the government should apply? Some people believe that it should be a free market model, which let the market forces decide. If there's a demand, you provide the supply. But that's not very right because it's driven by money. Some people favor a government regulation model where the government will actually look into it and say, I allow this, but I don't allow this particular thing. Or some people just adopt a very stringent method and say, this should all be banned. Government should not allow any of this kind of experiment at all. Genetic manipulation is actually very different from abortion in a way, right? Abortion means that, you know, you just decide you don't want to have particular baby or fetus. But in genetic manipulation, you still want to keep it, but you are manipulated to be a different baby, and that's where it's actually more controversial. Let's look at the discussion question. If let's say there's a shortage of fruits in the world today, do you think it's ethically right to genetically engineer the technology to change the genes of fruits so that you have larger papayas, larger bananas to cope with the increased demand? But think of it, you know, if you create a larger papaya, will you cause environmental problems in that? Thank you.